Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and welcome to this edition of Revealing Prophecy. Each week we connect the dots of the news from around the globe with biblical prophecy and talk about what was. The monologue is our original work, and all other articles are used giving credit to their respective sources. Inclusion of a story is provided for your information only and is not an endorsement of either the views of the author or their theology. Visit ignitinganation.com for a full roster of live daily interviews and check out the Biblical Truth Library containing almost 1,000 hours of rich biblical teachings. Join me in Israel, April 2nd to 13th in 2022. Use the contact form on ignitinganation.com for more details. We encourage you to subscribe to Igniting Nation's YouTube channel where you can find over 1,400 interviews from our daily live broadcast. Here's a quick look at what we'll be covering on today's show. I'll be opening up with a monologue, followed by a story from the Christian Post contributor Anugrah Kumar, the coronavirus poll. Most U.S. believers say God is telling them to change how they're living. A story by Michael Bachner from the Time of Israel. Israel braces for Iranian cyber attack after reportedly targeting strategic port. A story by Terry James, Evil Men and Seducers. A story by Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, the Muslim Waqf will reopen Al-Aqsa Mosque if Jews are allowed on the Temple Mount. And our final story by Jeffrey Grider. Barely 100 feet away from the Western Wall in Jerusalem, biblical archaeologists discover vast preserved complex from the time of Jesus. As we look at the Bible, we look at it as a book of prophecy, containing approximately 2,500 prophecies, of which around 2,000 have been fulfilled. Given that the Bible proves so reliable a document, there's every reason to expect that the remaining 500 prophecies, those slated for the time of the end, also will be fulfilled to the last letter. Who can afford to ignore these coming events, and much less miss out on the immeasurable blessings offered to anyone and everyone who submits to the control of the Bible's author, God Himself? Would a reasonable person take lightly God's warning of judgment for those who reject what they know to be true about Jesus and the Bible, or who reject Jesus' claim on their lives? Many would describe the current conditions of our lives as being steeped in chaos. Families, churches, and businesses are waiting for somebody to pull a string and open a door or close a door or tell us what we can and cannot do and how we are to do it. Masked or unmasked, small groups, no groups, groups 6 feet apart. As I talk to people all over the world, they too are awaiting the next announcement that will prolong or shorten their period of quarantine, shelter in place, or return to life under a new normal. There is no question that the virus is real, but as I look at my 68 plus years of life, we did not quarantine before the polio vaccine became available, and I knew kids who contracted polio. We did not respond to any other virus or flu in this manner, and it makes one wonder what is really going on. For the believer, the question is, are we being forced to bend our knee to a force other than God? On every one of my prior 16 trips to Israel, we visit Masada. No, Masada is not in the Bible, and I'm often asked why I take groups there on every trip. For those unfamiliar with the story of Masada, let me give you a thumbnail of the storyline of this historical and, in my opinion, a site which is the foreshadowing of what is to come in the last days. Josephus Flavius, the commander of Galilee during the Great Revolt in the 1st century AD, chronicled the known history of Masada. And the future excavation of the sites have largely collaborated his accounts. According to Josephus Flavius, the first fort at Masada was built by Jonathan the high priest, thought to be the Hashmonean king Alexander Jannaeus, who ruled from 103 to 76 BC, although no definitive ruins have been discovered from that time. Recognizing the defensive advantages of Masada, Herod built his complex there as a winter escape and haven from enemies, complete with castle, storerooms, cisterns, and a foreboding wall. After Herod's death and the annexation of Judea, the Romans built a garrison at Masada. When the Great Revolt of the Jews against the Romans broke out in 66 AD, a group of Jewish people known as the Sicarii, led by Menachem, took over the Masada complex. Following Menachem's murder in 66 AD in Jerusalem, Eleazar ben Yair fled from Jerusalem to Masada to command a group of Judean rebels. When Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, the remaining rebels joined Eleazar at Masada to live in Herod's former palaces. With Jerusalem in ruins, the Romans turned their attention to taking down Masada, the last community in which 960 rebels, including many women and children, lived. Led by Flavius Silva, a legion of 8,000 Romans built camps surrounding the base, a siege wall and a ramp on a slope of the western side of the mountain made of earth and wooden supports. After several months of siege without success, the Romans built a tower on the ramp to try to take out the fortress's wall. When it became clear that the Romans were going to take over Masada on April 15th in 73 AD, on the instructions of Ben-Yair, all but 2 women and 5 children who hid in the cisterns and later told their stories took their own lives rather than live as Roman slaves. According to Josephus' account in the Wars of the Jews, quote, they had died in the belief that they had left not a soul of them alive to fall into Roman hands. The Romans advanced to the assault, seeing none of the enemy, but on all sides the awful solitude, and flames within and silence. They were at a loss to conjecture what had happened here, encountering the mass of slain. Instead of exulting over enemies, they admired the nobility of their resolve. Imagine for a moment if you were faced with the same decision. Would you take the lives of your wife and children and ultimately your own so that you would not be forced to bend your knee to another god? Prophecy tells us that a man will rise to power who will make a covenant with many and set himself up in the temple and restore Jewish worship. All is glorious and peaceful for 3.5 years, and then according to Daniel and John the Revelator, this revered and Messiah-like figure will declare himself as God and enlist 10 kings to serve him to rule the nations. Anyone who does not take his mark will be persecuted, forbidden to buy or sell, and subject to death. There are a number of differing camps. Some who say that believers will be spared this encounter with the Antichrist. I do not share this view, and it's for that reason I believe the lesson of Masada is not only a historical memorial, but a foreshadowing of what we will face. We've already seen the division caused by distancing and mask requirements and forced business closings and government-controlled business openings. We've already seen religious freedoms of gatherings and churches being regulated by federal, state, and local government entities. We have seen firsthand arrests being made and fines being levied for non-compliance. What will it be like when the son of perdition rises to power, and how will you respond? Those brave and valiant men made a decision that they would rather die than be enslaved by Rome. They knew by faith that God was with them and that their decision was righteous and just in the eyes of God. Is Masada just a story from 2,000 years ago, or is it the foreshadowing of what is to come? Only you can decide for yourself and your family what you will do when faced with the same choice. Can you know for certain that you will not be here to face that same decision for you and your family? And if you are not 100% certain, then have you even considered what you will do when faced with the same set of circumstances? I believe this is a conversation that every family needs to have as we know what it is to come under the oppressive rule of a worldwide government that's going to force you to make a choice. Do you take the mark and live to buy and to sell, or do you choose by faith to believe that God's word is true and that your place with Messiah is secure in death as it is in life? I am neither advocating for or against the decision made by the heroes of Masada. I am challenging you as a believer to have this very conversation with your family. Know that the cost of taking the mark will forfeit your salvation. And as Yeshua himself said, you are either for him or against him. There is no middle ground. Like COVID-19, you did not see it coming, and the response was fear-based. No one was prepared for months of business shutdowns and the restrictions made on your freedoms. This was just a drill, and I'm not sure we passed the test. The rise of the Antichrist is not a fairy tale that can be dismissed. It is what will usher in the return of the Messiah. It must happen as it was foretold. The only variable is how will you respond when it does happen. As for me and my house, we will never bend our knee to any man, and will resist unto death the taking of any mark except one which clearly shows our faith in Messiah Yeshua. Our decision has been made. What about you? And that, my friends, is today's monologue. And now for this week's stories. Coronavirus poll. Most U.S. believers say God is telling them to change how they're living, from Anagra Kumar, Christian Post contributor. More than 60% of American believers of all faiths feel that the novel Coronavirus pandemic is a sign that God is telling humanity to change how it is living, according to a new study. 31% of Americans who believe in God feel strongly that the virus is a sign of God telling humanity to change, according to the study by the University of Chicago Divinity School and the Associated Press and ORC Center for Public Affairs Research. The nationwide survey conducted April 30th to May 4th, 2020, found that evangelical Protestants, 43%, are more likely than others to believe that strongly. And Black Americans, regardless of education, income, or gender, are more likely than those of other racial backgrounds to say that they feel the COVID-19 disease is a sign God wants humanity to change. 47% of African Americans say they feel that strongly, compared with 37% of Latino and 27% of white Americans, the survey adds. White evangelical Christians, 67%, are more likely than other American believers, 53%, to feel that God will protect them from being infected. White evangelical Christians, 7%, are less likely than others, 15%, to doubt God's existence or feel God has abandoned humanity, 3% versus 10% because of the COVID-19 outbreak. There were more than 1.4 million confirmed cases of coronavirus in the United States, with 89,564 deaths as of early Monday, according to Johns Hopkins University's Coronavirus Resource Center. The study shows that Americans are more likely to say that foreign governments' actions or policies, 43%, are the cause of the current coronavirus situation in the United States. 37% blame it on the U.S. government. 28% say other things in nature caused the current situation. 21% blame it on the global trade, and 11% blame it on human sinfulness. The survey reveals that Americans overall have a nuanced view on keeping a balance between religious freedom and public health. While 51% of Americans think in-person religious services should restart in some form, only 9% think services should be allowed without any restrictions. There is more support for drive-through services in some form, 87%. By comparison, 76% say people should be allowed to visit outdoor spaces like parks or beaches, at least in some form, and 49% say the same about a protest, rally, or march in public. Among Republicans, the support for drive-through services stands at 38%, while only 18% of Democrats are in favor of it. And 15% of Republicans support in-person religious services, compared to 7% of Democrats. The study also indicates that Americans are more likely to say that restrictions on religious activities do not violate freedom of religion. 42% say banning drive-through religious service violates religious freedom. 34% say that the same for in-person religious service bans, and 17% say the same for in-person or drive-through services that have restrictions on such a crowd size. As you can see, the polling results are all the way from one end of the spectrum to the other, telling us that we are a nation divided in our opinions, and even people of faith divided in their opinions about what should be done in response to this virus. Our next story, contributed by Michael Bachner from the Times of Israel. Israel braces for Iranian cyber attack after reportedly targeting strategic port. Israel's security firms and agencies are reportedly preparing for a potential Iranian or Iran-linked cyber attack in response to an attack blamed on the Jewish state that was said to have crippled computer systems at a strategic port in the south of the Islamic Republic. The Washington Post reported Monday that Israel brought down the Shahid Rajiz port computer systems, causing a total shutdown of the facility on May the 9th. Israel has refused to officially comment on the report, which cited U.S. and other foreign officials, saying Israel was likely behind the computer attack. The attack was apparently in response to an alleged Iranian attempt to hack into Israel's water infrastructure system. Israel's high-level security cabinet held a secret meeting to discuss a response to the hack attack in early May, according to Channel 13 News, and regarded the attempt to damage its water system, a non-military target, as crossing a red line. Securities officials on Tuesdays instructed agencies and sensitive facilities to raise their awareness and preparedness for the option of a retaliatory cyber attack as part of an apparent new tit-for-tat war, Hebrew language media reported. Cyber defense officials in the Israeli Defense Forces and the National Cyber Directorate have raised their alertness, expecting an attack on websites, servers, or services, the unsourced reports said. Employees have been ordered not to open or download files from unknown sources of people whose credibility is questionable. Officials have stressed that malicious messages could be ostensibly about the coronavirus crisis. Workers have also been told not to hand personal information or account details to unknown entities and to only download mobile applications from known app stores. Shahid Raji Port in the southern Hormozgan province is located some 25 kilometers or 15 miles from the city of Bandar Abbas and is by far Iran's largest and most strategically important port. It's also known as the Port of Bandar Abbas. It accounts for some 60% of all the country's port activity. Muhammad Saeed-Najad, the managing director of Ports and Maritime Organization of Iran, said in 2017. The significance of the port lies in the fact that it's located at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, where nearly 50,000 vessels of different countries sail annually, he told Iran's ILNA news agency at the time. Saad-Najad added that between March 2016 and March 2017, exports from the port totaled some 44 million tons of goods, worth more than $11.14 billion, and imports totaling nearly 10 million tons, worth $18.65 billion. Israel has long accused Iran of using the port for military purposes to aid terrorists elsewhere in the Middle East, including the Jewish state's foes Hamas and Hezbollah, with the IDF intercepting some of the shipments. Satellite images of the port on May 11th and May 12th taken by Planet Labs and seen by the Times of Israel showed a large number of ships idling off the port and a buildup of containers on dry land days after the alleged Israeli cyber attack. Army Chief Aviv Kohavi on Tuesday hinted at Israel's role in the cyber attack, saying the IDF would continue to use various military tools against the country's enemies. While it's not unusual for politicians to insinuate Israeli involvement in attacks on Iran and terror groups, it is less common for senior IDF officials who tend to maintain a policy of ambiguity regarding the military's activities abroad to do so. On Tuesday, the former head of IDF military intelligence, Amos Yadlin, said the Iranian cyber attack on water facilities, which failed to cause significant damage, appeared to be in response to recent Israeli attacks against Iran's forces and proxies in Syria. A security official who spoke on the condition that his identity and nationality not be revealed told the Washington Post that the attack caused total disarray at the port. Computers that regulate the flow of vessels, trucks, and goods all crashed at once, created massive backups on waterways and roads leading to the facility, the Post reported, adding that it had been seen in satellite photos showing miles-long traffic jams leading to the port and ships still waiting to offload several days later. Iran later acknowledged that an unknown foreign hacker had briefly knocked the port's computers offline. A recent cyber attack failed to penetrate the PMO systems and was only able to infiltrate and damage a number of private operating systems at the port. Muhammad Rastad, managing director of the Ports and Maritime Organization, said in a statement carried by ILNA. The response appeared to indicate that Israel had adopted a tit-for-tat strategy in responding to Iranian cyber warfare, like that already used by the Israeli military with physical or kinetic attacks on an Israeli official said. The cyber attack on Shahid Raji Port in Iran was an Israeli response to the cyber attack that the Iranians carried out against Israel 2 weeks before at Mikorot, which is the National Water Company components, an attack that failed, the official told Channel 12 News on condition of anonymity. Israel hopes that the Iranians stop there. They attacked water infrastructure components. They didn't really cause damage, but they crossed a line and Israel needed to retaliate, the official said. Iran, whose regime avowedly seeks the Jewish state's destruction, and Israel have engaged in covert cyber warfare for over a decade, including reported efforts by the Jewish state and the United States to remotely sabotage the Islamic Republic's nuclear program in 2010 using an advanced cyber weapon known as Stuxnet. Our next story, Evil Men and Seducers, by Terry James. Can there be little doubt that we have witnessed over these recent past years deception that has turned the nation upside down? Is the chaos and turmoil still not broiling enough and affecting almost every facet of life in America on a continuing basis? Anyone that with the capacity to comprehend their own presence on the planet should answer yes, if they are of the age to understand things going on with America and the world. Of course, many among us have no concern for what they see happening, except it might affect their ability to buy, sell, and access their favorite entertainment outlet. However, the COVID-19 matter has brought even most of these who are disinterested in politics of things into the we care group with the rest of us. This includes even the teenagers who normally have their noses stuck in their devices. They are now more than inconvenienced by the social distancing and other restrictions imposed by increasingly dictatorial-like edicts. In our town, for example, the mayor issued an order that no children below 16 years of age can go outside until the order is lifted. That was several weeks ago, and I think that's been lifted since. At any rate, it didn't work around here. Children out of school because the schools were shut down for the balance of the year had no concept of the order, and parents ignored it for the most part, according to what was observed. Nonetheless, the many gathering places for the teens and young adults have been off limits. No more than 10 people in the few stores that have been open during the coronavirus crisis have discombobulated many others, young and old alike. We now learn that many things about the pandemic have been without legitimate foundation, scientifically and even medically speaking. The entrenched governmental bureaucrats continue to fight against the president who vowed to drain the swamp. The conclusion is obvious, with only a scant possibility of that conclusion being unreasonably conspiratorial in my estimation. What the deep state couldn't accomplish through all of the things they tried, that is, to overturn the 2016 presidential election, they are now trying to do through a mafia-like terror attack. They are, in effect, threatening the very lifeblood of the American populace, both literally and figuratively. Literally by telling people they will die if they don't acquiesce to the draconian restrictions, figuratively by working to destroy the economy of the nation, thereby destroying ability to earn livelihoods in order to take the president down at the voting booths in November, thus to regain the political power they insanely crave. The Apostle Paul's prophecy has emerged with stark revelation at this time, so near the end of the age of grace. From 2 Timothy 3:13, but evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. We see the deception within the manipulation of the entrenched bureaucracy through revelations learned by reports such as the following. As reported weeks ago in mid-April, Dr. Fauci admitted that it was he and Dr. Birx who persuaded President Trump to lock down the U.S. economy, knowing the massive destruction this would cause in jobs, lives, and commerce. The president admitted during a press conference that in April, the two very smart people came into his office and urged him to lock down the economy or 2.2 million Americans would die from the China virus. But President Trump did not say who those two very smart people were. President Trump, quote, the big projection being that 2.2 million people would die if we did nothing. That was another decision we made, close it up. That was a big decision that we made. Two very smart people walked into my office and said, listen, these are your alternatives. And that was a projection of 1.5 to 2.2 million people would die if we didn't close it up. That's a lot of people. After Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci sat with the president, the U.S. went into lockdown, and since that time, over 30 million Americans have lost their jobs and thousands of companies have gone bankrupt. In late March, Neil Ferguson, who was behind the Imperial College coronavirus study, backtracked and said 20,000 Brits may die from the coronavirus instead of his original estimate of 500,000. Neil Ferguson resigned from his governing post as researcher this week after he was caught breaking his own lockdown rules by meeting with his married mistress at his home. Jim Hoft wrote, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx used Imperial College model, now confirmed as a complete fraud, to persuade President Trump to lock down the entire U.S. economy, from the Gateway Pundit, May 8, 2020. Many medical experts, physicians, and others have weighed in, pointing to the fact that the modeling on which this disastrous shutdown occurred is erroneous at best and complete fraud at worst. Mainstream media news has refused to acknowledge these contradictory expert findings because it doesn't fit their narrative, the model that they deem necessary to take down this president, in effect overthrow the 2016 election results, which have driven them to the madness we have witnessed since that election. Proof of Paul's prophecy was further validated this past week as having emerged in these troubled times through the matter of General Michael Flynn and the railroading done to him by the deep state intelligence agency top officials. The lying and deceit was so vicious that it reached the point that those who were sent to entrap General Flynn threatened to destroy his son and family if he didn't plead guilty to the totally false charges they concocted. Here's a brief account of last week's finding in the Flynn case. The U.S. Department of Justice is dropping its case against Michael Flynn, against former National Security Advisor and retired Army General Michael Flynn, according to the new court documents on Thursday. The DOJ filed new documents on Thursday to drop the case after a considered review of all the facts and circumstances of this case, including newly discovered and disclosed information. The DOJ further contended that Flynn's January 14, 2017 interview was conducted without any legitimate investigative basis and was untethered to and unjustified by the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Mr. Flynn. U.S. Attorney Jeff Jensen, who reviewed the Flynn case, recommended that Attorney General Bill Barr dismiss the case last week. Quote, "Through the course of my review of General Flynn's case, I concluded the proper and just course was to dismiss the case, Jensen said in a statement obtained by the Associated Press. I briefed Attorney General Barr on my findings, advised him on these conclusions, and he agreed. Flynn, 61, had pleaded guilty in federal court in Washington, D.C. on December 1, 2017 for providing a false statement to the FBI about his contact with Moscow's then ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak, during President Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Flynn was an advisor on the Trump campaign. Internal FBI notes unsealed last week suggest agents deliberated a goal of getting Flynn to lie during an interview that ultimately resulted in his firing from the White House and prosecuted by Robert Mueller's special counsel team. The notes, handwritten by the FBI's former head of counterintelligence, Bill Prystrap, after a meeting with then FBI Director James Comey and then FBI Director Andrew McCabe, suggest the FBI wanted to draw Flynn into a lie if they couldn't get him to admit to a violation of the Logan Act, which forbids U.S. citizens from conducting foreign diplomacy without authorization. What is our goal? Truth, admission, or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him and get him fired, said the note, which was shared on Twitter by Laura Widener. DOJ drops case against General Michael Flynn, May 8, 2020. Shakespeare's Mark Antony said in his words about Julius Caesar, "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones." We sure have endured the evil men and seducers have done in contravention of God's precepts for dealings in this life. Considering there being any good in these Washington would-be Caesars, I think had he lived today in America, the great bard might have changed his tune in the case of the D.C. swamp creatures. Our next story from Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. The Muslim Waqf will reopen Al-Aqsa Mosque if the Jews are allowed on the Temple Mount. From 2 Chronicles 3:1. Then Shlomo began to build the house of Hashem in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where Hashem had appeared to his father David, at the place which David had designated at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. On Sunday, the Waqf Islamic Authority held an emergency meeting concerning the Temple Mount. At the meeting, the Waqf extended the ban on Muslims praying at the Silver Dome Al-Aqsa Mosque and the gold-domed Dome of the Rock, a Muslim shrine built on the site of the Holy of Holies of the Jewish temples. The Jerusalem Islamic Waqf and Islamic Religious Trust, controlled by Jordan, that manages the Islamic sites in the old city of Jerusalem. Following the meeting, the Waqf threatened the Israeli government, saying that if Jews continue to tour the area surrounding the structures, they will open the gates and allow Muslims to enter en masse. This will be in direct violation of health ministry regulations, require social distancing, and will endanger the Palestinians who come to the site. The Waqf declared that even though it will result from their orders, the responsibility will be on the Israeli government. The Waqf claimed the decision to reopen Al-Aqsa is not influenced by religious feeling or by pressure on the Waqf management, but rather by religious, natural, and moral responsibility, following the advice of relevant health sources. The Waqf acknowledged that some of the worshippers may be carriers of the coronavirus and that thousands will be infected if the area is open. The move comes after an unprecedented decision by the Waqf 2 months ago to close the 2 structures on the Temple Mount, pursuant to pandemic restrictions, which limited the number of individuals allowed to congregate in a closed area to 10. The Waqf then insisted that in order to carry out the order, the Israeli government needed to exclude Jews entirely from the site. It should be noted that Muslims entered the Temple Mount via 11 gates with no security measure hindering them. Jews are only permitted to enter through the Mughrabi gate after rigorous background and security checks. Jews are limited to small groups, do not mingle with the Muslims, and are restricted from entering the structures. There is no reason why Jews visiting the site should affect the WAF carrying out the health ministry regulations. It should also be noted that despite Jews still being entirely restricted from entering the Temple Mount, the WAF continues to allow many Muslims to enter under the pretense of being WAF employees. Last week, the Jerusalem High Court of Justice ruled in favor of a petition brought by Arnon Siegel and Yehuda Etzion, demanding the Israeli government respond to claims that cut a secret deal with Jordan in which Jews would be excluded from the Temple Mount. The petition noted that banning Jews while allowing Arabs was unconstitutional, thus rendering such an agreement with Jordan illegal. The petition also noted that allowing the WAF staff onto the Temple Mount during the lockdown contravenes health ministry regulations. Siegel is a journalist and claimed that barring him entry to the site violates freedom of the press. The court ordered the Israeli government to respond by Monday, but that was extended until Wednesday. Despite the WAF's declarations, it is the Israeli government that is preventing Jews from ascending the Temple Mount, Siegel told Breaking Israel News. The WAF is threatening to react to any attempts by the Israeli government to allow Jews to enter the site. Siegel emphasized that even before the outbreak of the epidemic, the manner in which Jews toured the site constituted social distancing and was limited to small groups in open areas. There is no reason that should not be permitted even now, Siegel stated, restricting Jews in effect rewarding the violators of the law. Siegel believes that the Israeli government is planning on restricting Jews until after the culmination of the month of Ramadan on May 23rd. The Muslim prayers on the Temple Mount are usually attended by tens of thousands in the final days of Ramadan. The government will restrict the Jews in the hopes that the WAF will restrain the Muslims from arriving en masse, which would be an unmitigated public health catastrophe, Siegel said. Siegel is waiting for the government to respond to the court order, but even if there was no secret agreement with Jordan, the restriction of Jews from the Temple Mount is deeply disturbing. The government's actions concerning the Jews' religious rights to the Temple Mount are truly disgraceful, Siegel said. Arrangements were made for Jews to pray at the Western Wall and the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron. The Temple Mount is the Jews' holiest site. It's inconceivable that Jews would be entirely prevented from even visiting the site. Our next story from Jeffrey Grider. Barely 100 feet away from the Western Wall in Jerusalem, biblical archaeologists discover a vast preserved complex from the time of Jesus. 2,000 years ago, Jerusalem residents in Israel were storing food and water, cooking, maybe even living in a unique subterranean multi-room structure barely 100 feet away from the Holy Temple found by biblical archaeologists. As Israel prepares to celebrate Jerusalem Day, a commemoration of the day in which Jerusalem was reunified under Israeli sovereignty in 1967, biblical archaeologists are unveiling an utterly amazing historical find. A subterranean complex preserved in near pristine condition and dating back to the time of Jesus of Nazareth is being put on display. The purpose of this structure, however, remains shrouded in mystery as ongoing excavations continue to dig for more clues and answers. From Nehemiah 1 and 3, "And they said unto me, The remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire." 2019 was an amazing year for biblical archaeology, and that trend seems to be continuing here into 2020. Pray for the nation of Israel, and pray for the Jewish people who are preparing to enter into the time of Jacob's trouble. Don't worry about the disparaging comments your Jewish contacts on Facebook make when you post about the salvation of Jesus. Their eyes are closed and they don't know any better. Witness to them anyways and pray for their souls in spite of how they might treat you. Time is short. Make a difference for the Lord. From the Jerusalem Post, the new discovery was unveiled by the Israel Antiquities Authority and the Western Wall Heritage Foundation on Tuesday, ahead of Jerusalem Day. Descending into the underground chambers from the Western Wall Plaza, glaring with light and unusually still on the coronavirus regulations, and the unprecedented heat wave is nothing less than a journey back in time before Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans when the city was still bustling with Jewish life and rituals. At the time of the Second Temple, 2,000 years ago, this was a public area, the civic center of ancient Jerusalem. Dr. Barak Manakadem Givon, co-director of the excavation on behalf of the IAA, together with Tehila Sadiel, told Jerusalem Post, "We think that the public street passed just a few meters from here, and we are standing next to what we archaeologists call the Big Bridge, which connected the upper city to the temple itself. The complex features 2 rooms connected by a staircase and an open courtyard. The entrance presents clear signs of the presence of door hinges and bolts, while the walls offered several niches for oil lamps as well as carved-in shelves. The structure was discovered under the white mosaic floor of a monumental Byzantine building dating back to about 1400 years ago. The large hollow space where both the building and the more ancient chambers stand presents walls erected in the typical Jerusalem stones of different sizes, blackened by centuries, pieces of Roman column, floors built in a variety of materials and at different levels. The excavations are ongoing. In a corner, an IAA conservator was working on preserving the Byzantine mosaic, while a few meters away, two archaeologists were sifting through some dirt to make sure it did not contain other artifacts or shards. Clay cooking vessels, oil lamps, and stone containers useful to store water, minimizing the risk of giving it ritual impurity according to Jewish laws, were among the articles and objects retrieved by the researchers so far, allowing them to assess that the carved structure was in use in the 1st century CE. How much time earlier it was actually built for now remains a mystery, one of the many things that will be addressed as studies proceed. Several features make the discovery unique. Madakadam Givon pointed out very few structures from that period survive in the city. After the Roman siege and destruction of the year 70 AD, Jerusalem was burned and devastated, and all the Jewish people were exiled. A few decades later, the Romans started rebuilding it from scratch, he said. Moreover, usually structures in that period were built in stone, while those who hewed the rooms underground chose to carve them out of hard bedrock, which required a considerable effort. Besides, from burials, we have rarely found any complete rock-cut rooms from that era. Most people in ancient Jerusalem lived in stone-built houses. What was the function of this hewn system just under the street level? Was it a house, a storage unit, something else, the archaeologists added. According to Madakadam Givon, penetrating the secrets of the site will require another 20 or 30 years of excavations. Among others, a goal is to connect it with the area where the main street passed. Even the purpose of the Byzantine building, whose floor protected the ancient rooms for so many centuries, is still shrouded in mystery. We do not know whether it was a religious or civil building, IAA archaeologist Michael Chernin told the Post. We do know it collapsed during an earthquake at the beginning of the 11th century. Chernin pointed out that in the Crusader period, the area was abandoned. It was settled again in the Mamluk period, the 13th to 16th century. Artifacts from these different times were also uncovered by the researchers, including worked bone tools, clay vessels, a strainer, and a candle holder. We want to understand the function of these structures as well as their connection with the topography of the Roman and Byzantine Jerusalem, he concluded. It is possible that more subterranean rooms will also emerge. I am excited on the eve of Jerusalem Day to reveal to the Jewish nation a new treasure trove of impressive and fascinating findings that shed light on Jerusalem throughout the generations in general, and on the eve of the destruction in particular, commented Mordecai Suli Eliav, director of the Western Wall Heritage Foundation, according to a release. This finding epitomizes the deep connections of Jews with Jerusalem, their capital. Even when there were physical limitations, prayer at the foot of the remnant of our temple never ceased, and this is tangible evidence of this. And that, my friends, is this week's edition of Revealing Prophecy. This program, along with Revealing the Bible, are only available after they air through the Biblical Truth Library. Visit ignitinganation.com and check out the Biblical Truth Library and our guest lineup of our daily broadcast of Revealing the Truth. Follow us online through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can catch up on over 1,800 interviews and never miss out on any of our great guests. Your comments and questions are always welcome, and you can use the contact form found on ignitinganation.com. Don't forget our regular live broadcast on Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. You can now watch a second channel on our ignitingnation.com/live to watch a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week feed of some of our featured guests. Until we see you right back here for the next edition of Revealing the Truth, we thank you for watching and bless you with Shalom.